The Caspian Sea, the $10 trillion void that's swallowing global energy. The rig's helideck looks out over mud. Pumps groan to a stop. A crewman points where the channel used to be and says nothing. 30 meters from the jacket, the sea is a brown skin, cracked like old paint. A barge sits crooked, marooned mid-route, its wake frozen as ridges of silt. Contracts still assume water. Insurance still prices depth. But the Caspian is falling about 7 centimeters a year, and the northern basin is running out of draft. Rigs don't move, pipelines don't float, and $10 trillion in energy bets were written on a surface that's leaving. To understand why, follow the steel. The vanishing sea, measured in steel. Start with a shoreline that won't stay put. Since the mid-2000s, the Caspian has dropped more than 2 meters. That's not a statistic, it's a new map with stakes you can price. What used to be fairway now grows reeds. What used to be safe water now stacks whitecaps when wind piles fetch across shallows turn to pans. Pilots relearn bearings every season as boys sit on sandbars that didn't exist last spring. Ports feel it first. Aktau's approach silts into a chessboard of dredge cuts. Turkmenbashi's berths need constant bite and dump just to hit published drafts. Baku extends its fingers seaward, while tug skippers radio sheepish updates. Light load again because the lake fell. Aro ramps hang over water that sits too low to meet them, so trucks back down to groan onto decks, scraping steel. Ferries on the Aktau, Baku line shave payloads to make the tide windows that aren't really tides, just wind set and a lake's long slump. Here's a day you can price and feel. A captain out of Aktau takes crude and condensate in parcels, leaves 10% in shore tanks to clear the shoal at the harbor mouth, and misses his convoy slot by 90 minutes. The queue at Sangachal reshuffles. Demurrage clocks start. A refinery downstream, counting on that feed, slows a unit to match. The penalty clause bites a balance sheet that was already thin. Insurance doesn't like surprises. Underwriters re-rate voyages that depend on draft margins thinner than paperwork suggests. A gale over the steppe can blow 30 centimeters of water down the northern basin in hours. That's the difference between a safe approach and a scrape that bends a prop. Premiums creep. Captains speed less to protect hull and schedule, which means fewer rotations per season. That cost lands in the per-barrel math. Meanwhile, ports throw iron at the retreat, and it still isn't enough. Emergency dredges chew channels through sticky clay and lenses of hard pan. Cutter suction dredges park for months, pipelines snaking ashore to new spoil grounds. Yet the bottom moves, silt slumps back. The work never finishes, it just pauses between storms. Where dredging can't keep up, operators improvise. Barge convoys shuttle kit piece by piece to offshore worksites, swapping to rail when lake windows close. Tankers offload to shore tanks and feed trains headed west. Every mode swap adds hands, losses, and risk. Light water is dangerous water. As salinity edges and temperatures shift, wind fetch turns the northerly shallows into a chop that breaks wrong. A hull designed for steady lake swells meets pyramids of short, steep waves and pounds. Bulwarks creak. Welds get inspected twice as often. Small craft tasked with crew runs or pipeline patrols sit out more days, pushing maintenance windows into nights already cut thin by weather. The numbers tighten at terminals. Draft boards show centimeters nobody used to read. Port masters stack arrivals to exploit narrow periods when a northerly lifts water or a calm lets silt settle. Miss the lift, lose a day. On shore, accountants reforecast cash flows because that day repeats across a quarter and ruins covenant math. Aktau, Turkmenbashi, Baku, they're not just points. They're bets on the Caspian being wet and reasonably predictable. Now engineers extend jetties, lower berths, deepen turning basins, and still lose ground. Kazakhstan pushes dredging at Kurik to keep ROROs honest. Azerbaijan hustles towage and pilots to squeeze more from the same water. Turkmenistan adds capacity on paper and then meets the bottom with the first heavy run. Micro-stories multiply. A feeder master lines up on a channel cut last month, sees ripple lines where soundings promise depth, and calls for a tug to nose him through silt that wasn't on the chart. The tug sucks mud, overheats and radios back, reduced draft or weight. A pipeline spool on a barge misses its weather window, sits on hire for 3 extra days, then transfers to a rail cradle at twice the cost. The crew goes home a week late. Kids wave at a father who missed a school play because the lake fell faster than the schedule. Upstream, river timing adds insult. The Volga's spring pulse, that soft top-up that used to buy the north a season, arrives thinner and earlier. Reservoir managers above Astrakhan juggle hydropower, navigation and flood safety. The sea gets what's left. On the delta, fresh channels go slack. Sand blooms in bends. The entrance bars thicken. Barges scrape. Pilots refuse nighttime transits they used to fly blind with confidence. So operators hedge. They pre-stage inventory and treat every calm day like a holiday. Extra tugs on standby, spare screens for intakes that clog with weed as shorelines go green where blue used to be. They buy amphibious kit, hovercraft for crew, shallow draft cats for survey, and write SOPs that read like field medicine. Stabilize, move, fix later. All of it rolls downhill to the wells. Fields that sat comfortably inside the logistics envelope nudge the edge. If transport adds $3 a barrel, the marginal prospect slips red. Maintenance that depended on 2-week lake windows now compresses into 5 days with 3 good mornings. A crane barge stuck on a shoal means a compressor stays offline and a plateau dips. This was the moment everything changed, not a storm but a spreadsheet. The Caspian's decline rate, about 7 centimeters a year, turned ports into projects and voyages into negotiations. While docks scrape bottom, something else is sinking too. Under the rigs and routes, the seabed itself is moving. Subsidence, pipelines, and the hidden collapse. While docks scrape bottom, the seabed sags. You don't see it from a helideck. You feel it in gauges and in pipe that doesn't sit where it used to. Mature reservoirs across the North Caspian have been bled for decades. Pull fluids out of rock, the rock compacts. A few millimeters a year under platform, a few centimeters along a trunk line laid on sediment that behaves like memory foam with a slow leak. Add falling water above, less buoyancy, more effective weight on every span, and a silent geometry shifts. Reservoir engineers track compaction on logs and level shots. Offshore supervisors track it when a walkway that once met a boat at mid-tide now meets it at shoulder height, with no tide to blame. Around Kashagan and Filanovsky, the fix looked like steel, piles driven deeper, jacks to keep decks true. Underwater, the fixes are uglier. Pipelines designed for partial support lose it as mud slumps away. A sag bend appears between supports that were once enough. Stretch concentrates, coatings crack. Corrosion starts where cathodic protection didn't plan for air. Shallow water means pipes are close to waves. When levels drop, wave base bites deeper relative to the line. Storms you used to ignore now push oscillatory loads into spans that didn't exist last year. Meanwhile, canals and approach channels, dredged deeper to nurse shipping, change local currents. Scour pits dig at pipe shoulders. In places where builders floated sections into place, the loss of buoyancy isn't theory. Negative freeboard in a canal becomes a buckle risk if a pressure swing meets a tired elbow. The inspection pig tells that story without poetry. A launch in autumn, a reception a day later, and a data file that shows a healthy oval cross-section turning into a flattened egg near KM 47. Ovalization means load. Load means risk. When the control room flags it, operators do what their contracts hate. They derate pressure and shut in sections to keep a defect from becoming a failure. Phones ring in ministries before the valves finish closing. Here's a micro moment. A pipeline controller on a night shift in Aral watches differential pressures drift outside comfort. The pig run was clean, but the trending is. He calls the field. A maintenance lead boots up a vibro monitor feed from a suspect span. The numbers twitch with a storm that started 6 hours north. They mark a slowdown. By morning, a minister's aide is asking why export receipts will miss target this week. Nobody mentions mud when they brief the headline. They say integrity. They say caution. Subsidence isn't uniform. A platform over compacting pocket can tilt a few millimeters. A buried lateral over stiffer clay won't. That mismatch creates kinks at tines, stress at flanges, and weird wear at supports. Repair seasons shrink as the lake grants fewer calm days. Divers lose hours to chop. ROVs fight silt plumes raised by their own thrusters because exposed flats feed dust to every wind. Each day lost in May becomes a September job that runs into ice prep. The stakes stack fast. The Caspian's export math is narrow. A lot of barrels ride on a handful of corridors. The CPC pipeline to Novorossiysk is the artery for Kazakhstan's crude. Shut it to weld a clamp near the shore and storage balloons inland. If you throttle an offshore trunk line that feeds it, the congestion starts earlier and spreads wider. Traders notice. They price risk into spreads. Caspian barrels sell at a discount not because the oil changed, but because the path did. Companies respond with steel and schedule. They add supports under free spans and grout bags to armor scoured shoulders. They reroute over microdeltas that didn't exist 10 years ago, chasing stable ground that won't stay stable. They derate lines in summer when wave energy bites. They pre-stage repair skids and composite wraps at ports where pilots still promise access on short notice. Capex spikes in columns nobody wanted to see grow. Integrity budgets swell. So do insurance questionnaires. Regulators watch and adjust windows. Environmental permits that once allowed a whole season of nearshore work narrow to protect spawning runs forced into fewer viable shallows as levels drop. That leaves contractors threading needles. Enough calm, enough daylight, enough permit hours, and a supply chain that delivers the right gasket on the right barge with a channel deep enough to float it. Miss one, wait a week. Meanwhile, inland canals change character. When water sits lower, the Volga and feeder channels lose the lift that kept heavy pipe strings buoyant during tow-outs. Builders who used to count on water to share the load now count axle weights on multi-wheels and the deflection of old bridges not designed for a pipe that won't float. A laid-on yard that was a barge ride to a spool base becomes a convoy with escorts and curfews. Market desks don't need the physics, they need predictability. Every unplanned derate throws a calendar, cargoes get renominated, blends change as operators lean on different fields to meet a spec. A cargo that was CPC blend last month tastes more like Tengiz this month. Refiners hedge, discounts creep, the reputation follows the barrel. What nobody planned for was the compounding. Falling water removes buoyancy, raises wave interaction, exposes lines to temperature swings, and complicates crew access. Compaction below quietly shifts supports and stresses. Dredging to fix shipping bites into seabeds that used to cradle pipe. Then a pig finds a shape that suggests fatigue. One detail would prove crucial later. Every fix assumes a map that holds still. Here, the map refuses. The engineering scramble sits on top of an older argument. What exactly is this water in the eyes of the law? Sea versus lake, the $10 trillion legal trap. Call it a sea and you think freedom of navigation, pipelines laid like nerves across a continental shelf. Call it a lake and you think literal rights, everything negotiated at the shoreline. The Caspian is neither officially. In 2018, after decades of arguments, the 5 littoral states signed a convention giving it special legal status. The seabed would be divided into national sectors. The surface would be shared. It sounded elegant. It turned out slippery, and it's exactly the gray zone Russia and Iran used to force environmental veto power over subsea pipelines. To understand why, follow a cable that never got laid. Turkmenistan's gas sits on one side. Azerbaijan's connection to Europe sits on the other. A short pipe across the middle could have fed the southern gas corridor. It didn't happen. On paper, the 2018 deal let coastal states agree to pipelines that crossed only their sectors with environmental safeguards. In practice, Russia and Iran raised those safeguards like a gate, wielding basin-wide impact claims to stall the Trans-Caspian idea. Environmental reviews became vetoes in everything but name. Meetings multiplied. Shovels stayed in warehouses. Meanwhile, where to draw the lines underwater became its own chessboard. Midline, modified equidistance, enclaves around projecting coasts. Each formula moved billions in reserves a few clicks one way or the other. Unitization, the oil industry's polite word for sharing a reservoir that straddles a border, needed trust and timing. Instead, surveys met suspicion. A well on one side looked like drainage from the other. Tempers stayed low, paperwork stayed high, and investors priced delay into every forecast. Here's a room you don't see on tour. A law firm in Baku, windows over the bay, spreads maps on a table, bathymetry, license blocks, a consultant's best guess at a carbonate rim. 2 clients stare at a thin blue line labeled proposed sector boundary. If it shifts 3 kilometers, a prospect lands outside their license. If it stays, their lender unfreezes the next tranche. The meeting isn't about geology anymore. It's about treaty grammar and how a comma in Russian versions compares to the Farsi and Kazakh texts. The surface being shared sounds benign until ships need rules. Who inspects? Who escorts? Who patrols? The 2018 convention sketched naval cooperation and left edges undefined. That ambiguity showed up as quiet incidents, patrol boats shadowing survey vessels, fishery enforcement bumping against oilfield security perimeters. Nothing dramatic, enough to make project managers carry two plans, one for weather, one for neighbors. Pipeline approval sat in the grayest zone of all. The letter said literal states whose sectors were crossed could approve with environmental certification. The spirit, as exercised by Moscow and Tehran, said the whole sea had a say. They argued currents don't respect lines on charts. A leak in the middle finds everyone's shore. Environmental concern did real work in memos, while geopolitics did the work in private. Meanwhile, European buyers courted Ashgabat for molecules they could count as diversification. Deals were signed around the obstacle. Swaps through Iran, compression tweaks east of the Caspian, talk of floating LNG that never penciled. Financing changed shape in that fog. Banks demanded political risk insurance priced for a map that might move. Legal opinions came with pages of caveats. Field unitization agreements stalled, while lawyers debated reference points and datums. Liability for spills zigzagged between civil codes and sovereign immunities. Everyone agreed to arbitrate in neutral venues. Nobody wanted to be the first case. Onshore, the ambiguity bled into ports. If the surface is shared, can Azerbaijan extend a security cordon around Sangachal Bay that nudges into what Turkmen skippers consider open water? If a dredge plume drifts across an informal line, whose permit language governs, port masters solved it day by day, with radio calls, favors, and pilots who knew which uniform not to surprise. Back-channel swaps tried to thaw the gridlock. Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan floated joint development over disputed structures, worked the reservoir together, split the result, skipped the boundary fight. It looked sensible. Then someone asked who operated, under which safety rules, with which environmental standard when a winter blows spills diesel. The answer required trust stronger than the convention supplied. Talks cooled. The legal trap tightens because the water is leaving. As the shoreline retreats, the baseline used to draw sector limits can shift in practice, even if not in law. A dredged channel becomes a state's lifeline and therefore a point of leverage. A stranded offshore installation sits on what's effectively land, raising questions no negotiator thought to write down. Do maritime safety codes still apply if your platform is now a peninsula? Who owns the dirt that appeared? Russia and Iran play a longer game under the same rules. Russia leans on the Volga, about 80% of the Caspian's inflow, to shape both hydrology and politics. Iran leans on geography, its southern shore deeper and less exposed to desiccation, and on the north-south corridor that ties the sea to rail and road in a sanction-proof loop. Both cite ecology when subsea pipes threaten their leverage. Both offer swaps and partnerships when they don't. The price shows up where bankers live. Rising borrowing costs for anything that touches contested or contingent assets. Escrow requirements that lock cash to environmental performance benchmarks. Premiums for contractors willing to sign under two legal systems at once. Delay damages tied to approvals nobody controls. It's not melodrama, it's math. Meanwhile, a young engineer in Aarau scrolls through PDFs of the 2018 convention on her laptop while her boss asks when the pigging will finish. She's not a lawyer, but her maintenance plan depends on a permit that depends on a boundary that depends on a meeting in a city she's never visited. The sea keeps retreating, the law keeps hedging. And a pipeline that could lower pressure on everyone stays theoretical, because the Caspian is what the signatures made it, something you can't quite name, holding 10 trillion in bets that need a word.